Hello everybody, my name is Simon. I'm the one with the loud voice to get your attention, but it's not about me. It is about, of course, these two wonderful gentlemen, the Canton Network and all of the world of tokenization. So, Yuval, if anybody doesn't know, could you remind everybody who you are and what digital asset does?
Sure. So I'm Yuval. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Digital Asset. We are a company that 10 years ago thought that everything will be digital and bought the domain digitalasset.com for I think $5,000 or $10,000. And now we're screwed because every time someone searches for digital assets, they get confused. What is this digitalasset.com? So we started the company believing that everything will become, like I said, digital asset, whether it's backed by a physical asset or not. And this whole idea of tokenization of real world assets was really kind of the direction that we were going after. The problem is that, when you start thinking about the likes of Ethereum and some of these public permissionless chains, they envision a world where everything, sits on one ledger. And for us, that just never made sense. We had a panel this morning with a bunch of regulators. And if you just start thinking about governance, and different countries have regulations that are not the same, they change at different times. Well, how do you actually change one ledger to meet all of these regulatory requirements? So really, that's how the idea of Canton came about. We have a team in Zurich. Zurich is in Switzerland, one country that actually is composed of many cantons. And every canton has its own sovereignty. They can set their rules, but they all interoperate under one country called Switzerland. So we thought it would be a good name for a network, which is really a network of networks. So think about if you are Goldman or HSBC and you're tokenizing, or BNP we have here, and you're tokenizing assets. So imagine you bring in a digital money market fund. And now we have another client, Broadridge, that does repo, or we have Equiland that does securities lending, or anybody else that requires collateral. Now imagine that one of those tokenization applications can actually interoperate with a completely different application in order to provide that collateral. So the idea, again, of Canton is to give a user experience, a feel of one unified network, but it's actually broken down into a lot of these sovereign applications that can interoperate with one another.
That's very helpful, and we'll come back and unpack that, but we just have to take a moment to recognize the wonderful Chris Giancarlo. Again, for anybody who has lived under a rock, remind everybody of your history.
A big rock.
Well, I'm probably known for serving as chairman of the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission, but what you may not know is that before I joined the priesthood that is market regulation, I actually spent 14 years as an executive with an interdealer broker. In fact, GFI Group, which has its offices a few blocks from here. And I must say, it is really comforting being back in a very small room with a lot of city types 4 deep at the bar swirling champagne. It's good to know that things in London don't change at least that much. So it's good to be with you. And I'm also a board member of Digital Asset. I've been a fan of this company since I heard about it first with Blythe Masters and Don Wilson, and with the Seven Ridge investment. I was convinced to come on the board and see through this very exciting development with Canton, which we'll be speaking about tonight. So that's who I am.
Fantastic, Chris. And I think it'd be good to go on the arc of the tokenization journey, because maybe in 2016, maybe even 15, almost for a decade now, we've been talking about, distributed ledgers, blockchain, not Bitcoin. We've been talking about this. There's been a lot of talk, but a decade on, is tokenization of real world assets a technology whose time has come, or a technology whose time will never come? What's your perspective on that?
Well, maybe I can answer that by telling you how I fell down into the distributed ledger rabbit hole. We all have our own, those that have gone down have their own stories, but mine actually has to do a lot with over-the-counter markets and my work at GFI Group. GFI Group, I don't know if it is today, but back when I was there in the mid-2000s, GFI had about 80% of the CDS market trading on its platform. And at the time that Lehman Brothers fell, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York estimated, based upon gross notional amount of CDS written by banks that they reported annually on their balance sheets, that there was about $400 billion of protection written against the failure of Lehman Brothers. And they basically extrapolated and said, well, if there's $400 billion written on Lehman Brothers, there must be $800 billion on Morgan Stanley, and there must be a trillion two written on JP Morgan. And they came up with a program called the TARP program that's very similar to what a fire brigade does if a house is on fire. They wet down all the houses around the house on fire. In this case, they loaded the balance sheet of all the banks surrounding Lehman Brothers, and they did that to stop the crisis. It struck me as very odd at the time that they were making that calculation, because we knew at GFI that every bank that was writing protection was turning around and re-hedging that protection with other banks. I knew the net figure had to be much lower. And I called a professor at NYU called Bruce Tuckman, and I said, Bruce, you've done some research in this. What do you think the net is? And he said, well, if it's 400 billion in gross, the net's probably, I'm guessing, 50, 60, 80 billion. Well, anyway, I got involved in the writing of what became the Dodd-Frank Act, the swaps provisions, and the Obama administration recognized my work and asked me to join the CFTC. And the very first thing I did when I got there was I asked the chief economist to calculate the net number. Well, he couldn't get it done. I became chairman in 2017. I called Tuckman. I said, come work for us and do this calculation. By the spring of 2017, we knew the real number. The real number on a failure of Lehman Brothers was not 400 billion. The net number was less than $9 billion. And that's now been published by Professor Bruce Tuckman of NYU. Think about it. If we knew in 2008 that a failure of Lehman Brothers would have only triggered $9 billion of default, we could have let it fail. People would have been lined up around the block to buy it. Mm-hmm. The Fed could have bailed it out. We would have had policy options that we didn't have. Well, imagine if all those liabilities were on a blockchain. And that was the eureka moment for me when I read the Satoshi Nakamoto white paper, is this is a tool that could prevent the type of crisis we had in 2008 and all that loss of value destruction that came with it. And so I became a huge fan of distributed ledger technology and crypto. And in 2017, we greenlighted the launch of Bitcoin futures, which was, I mean, everybody thinks about the United States being behind the rest of the world. In 2017, we were ahead of the rest of the world. And the best part was getting calls from European regulators saying, don't greenlight Bitcoin futures. You're going to cause the fall of Western civilization. And I'm laughing because 5 years later, Europe's rushing to get their MiCA legislation done to get ahead of the Americans. But what we did was the first in the world. So anyway, long story, when I left the commission, I'm convinced this is the technology of the future. This is the internet doing to banking and finance and money itself what it's already done to social networking and information gathering and entertainment and leisure and retail shopping. It's changing everything, and it's making all of those activities 24/7, 365, disintermediated activities. This is going to change everything we know about finance. And what's going to happen is the large banks, which already are kind of quietly devoting huge resources to this, with a few breakthroughs, all of a sudden the middle tier, the next tier of banks are all going to have to do this, but they're not going to build it themselves. Mm-hmm. They're going to look around and say, what's the industrial grade solution for this that works, that delivers all the needs we have for privacy built into it, but it's interoperable with all of our peers, and that's Canton.
So that's a great segue to some of the challenges with some of the networks. You did sort of mention in the opening some of the benefits of Canton Network, but really help me understand the challenges. Some of the networks out there, yes, everybody's heard of the Ethereum types, but there are many other private networks, one-off networks, ledgers being built for specific problems, specific use cases. What is the fundamental issue with that design approach, and also the fundamental technical challenge with some of the cryptography that's happening that's holding some folks back?
Yeah, so maybe I will say that, to me, the three things that you need to solve and to really achieve, what Chris is talking about is first of all is control, access control, meaning think about, regulators are comfortable with people running heavily regulated applications on the internet, even though we know that there are really, really bad things that happen on the internet. Well, why are they comfortable with that? Because the internet gives you the tools to control access, meaning when, whatever company bank.com website exists, when you go there, you can't just get access to all of their products and services, right? So they can control access. The second thing is once you put in your password and username, assuming you got KYC to AML, it doesn't mean that you can just see everyone's account information, right? And again, in crypto, these things seem just how it should be. And that's because you can have control of privacy. So you could actually segment privacy, who gets to see what under what scenario. And the third one is interoperability. So again, the internet gives you this user experience that all data can interoperate with one another to create, again, this experience of one big network. So those are the three things in order to achieve, in my opinion, the ability to move financial services into DLT technology. Now, to achieve those three things is just not simple. It takes time. I think Canton had to go through at least 3 or 4 architecture designs. And what the crypto or these permissionless chains came and said, you know what? No need for privacy, no need for control. We just want interoperability. Yeah. And and Ethereum was the first. So what Ethereum said is no privacy, no control, and everything exists on one ledger, right? And the reality is that now people are starting to understand, regulators are starting to say privacy, permissionless, but also this one ledger approach from a very basic physics does not scale. Yeah. Right? You can't just put every application in the world on one ledger and hope that that thing will scale. So then came, the Polygons of the world, the Avalanches of the world, and said, cool, we'll solve the problem slightly different. We'll now segment and we'll have many ledgers, and was what they called L2s. But again, now how do you do privacy? So they didn't solve privacy. They were just saying, now instead of having all the world in one ledger, you could create a small group. Imagine you and your buddies play poker. We'll track our chips in this one group. But again, within that one group, you don't have privacy. Yeah. So again, solving for privacy is a big challenge. And the last thing is that a lot of these layer 2s can't even interoperate with one another. So it's not that I think that there's necessarily a design flaw. I think that it's by design, these features, right?
It's different design goals.
Yeah, different design goals. And for us, we never wanted to go after NFTs or these bearer instrument tokens. We always wanted to go after real world assets. So for us, this control, privacy, and interoperability.
But we've seen sort of death by POC, death by pilot for the last decade or so. So help me understand where the rubber hits the road on some of this stuff with Canton Network in particular, because it's fine to do 1 transaction, 10 transactions, but are we starting to see volume come through? And how does Canton unlock that?
So, I'll just give a few examples and you tell me if those are POCs. So with Broadridge, we are processing today over, I think it's close to $120 billion of repo every single day. And I think we're going to get close to $250 billion by the end of this year. It has 4 different repo products. You're going to see electronic execution venue connects to it to actually start offering electronic trading on the repo market. We have a consortium of banks called Versana that have tokenized credit products, so syndicated lending, private placements. And I think today they're probably close to $2 trillion worth of products that have been onboarded. 15% of the U.S. physical nat gas market is running post-trade every single day on Canton. And then I mentioned the banks, HSBC just recently issued close to $1 billion of government debt in Hong Kong. So I don't know. I think that what we are trying to do is wait for a period of time, because I think that what the industry has done very poor is they sold the value before you could actually see anything real. I can tell you that on the physical nat gas example, it's been running now close to a year and a half, and now we're actually starting to see the numbers. So the participants in the network have seen a 50% OPEX reduction when they actually trade with one another.
Wow.
Let me jump in here too. We talk about time of these things. I've often heard people say, well, when's it going to happen? As if we've been waiting a lifetime. There's a very good historical analogy. In 2000, we had something called the dot-com crash, and Time magazine ran an article referring to an e-commerce site called pets.com, and they called it pets.bomb, and mocked the whole notion of e-commerce. The fact of the matter is, e-commerce really started coming in the late 1990s, and it did in fact crash in 2000. The time of Pets.com's crash, there was about 350 million users worldwide of e-commerce. The truth is, though, that Pets.com did not fail because people didn't want to buy pet supplies online. It failed because they didn't want to do it using dial-up modems. Mm-hmm. They didn't want to do it having to put their credit card information into some dodgy website, and they didn't want to wait 3 weeks for the pet supplies to arrive. It took the build-out of 4G technology. It took the build-out of PayPal. It took the build-out of AWS delivery and same-day delivery services for e-commerce to become a reality. By 2010, that 350 million users of e-commerce became 2 billion. And by 2020, as we're going into the COVID lockdown, it was close to 5 billion. Today, it's about 7 billion people today using e-commerce. So looking back, it all seems logical. We all use e-commerce now. But 20 years ago, people were questioning its very premise. Infrastructure takes time to build. The concept is often sold ahead of the infrastructure build out. But what we're talking about here with Canton is infrastructure that's ready to go and be built on today. And you're going to see this happen. The direction is set. But sometimes it does take a little bit of time.
I like because, I mean, here in Europe, there's a good example of a piece of infrastructure that, especially in financial services, which I think took over 10 years, which is T2S.
Oh,
right? That thing. So, yeah, I mean, the reality is that moving financial services due to regulation, due to other pressures that are coming, just takes time. But I think that for us, at least with Canton, and this is, we're going to talk about a few other things, we wanted to actually show that the technology does what it does for a long period of time, rather than, again, these POCs and kind of promise the future.
The damn regulators are often the stumbling block to moving forward too. So
yeah, well, absolutely. So moving on then. If we've challenged that this infrastructure can work, I also remember the iPhone being a toy that was never going to get adopted by any serious business person, and no financial institution would ever touch the cloud. These things are now changing over time, of course. The Canton Network is entering sort of a new phase. Do you want to just unpack what that phase is and how it goes from some really good point solutions with meaningful volume to something that can start to connect those things in a meaningful way?
So Canton had its first version, I think, in 2020. And in 2020, what we wanted to do is, again, start onboarding assets into the technology, prove the technology does what it needs to do, go through security audits, do all of the fun stuff. And now I think we have anywhere between 15 to 20 projects that are running on Canton and doing some of the examples that I just mentioned. But the goal was always, again, to create this unified network experience where I can connect into a network and feel like I'm getting this kind of like one network experience. And one of the challenges that a lot of these permissioned applications had is, how do I interoperate with one another? Yeah. Like, do I need to take a Besu instance or a Corda instance and put all of these assets into that one instance? We know that that's not realistic. So our vision was always to make Canton a public network that, again, is not permissionless by definition. It's actually permissioned by definition, in the sense that I can create a permissionless application, but I have to explicitly define the application to be permissionless. and you use the public infrastructure to interoperate effectively, kind of the integration layer between all of these different applications and assets that exist on Canton. So we've been working on, legal analysis, but also on the technology of creating public Canton. And we are ready to, not to announce publicly, but maybe in this forum, amongst friends, that within the next 2 months, public Canton will be launched, and we'll have some. We'll have. I think what's exciting is that you will see institutions that you wouldn't expect to see attached to public chains, actually running the infrastructure. So they would be the validators under the hood running the network. And the other part that to us was extremely important is you're looking at, like, for example, recently in Ethereum, right? There was a hack, or there was an issue, and you have Vitalik, who's very smart and is an inspiration and a role model, but he just says, "Oh, we should just fork the ledger and roll back," and everybody goes like, "Sure," right? Yeah. Like now imagine that you have that equivalent in
implement finality.
Yeah, they're like, "Oh, just Ken Griffin is a terrible person. Just fork the ledger and forget about all of Citadel's position." I mean, and I'm making a silly example, but that's effectively what happened, right? So to us, the governance of the network was just as critical as the technology under the hood. And we wanted to make sure that everybody understand that at Digital Asset, we take these type of things very seriously. So the other thing that was an amazing surprise is that we approached Linux, and we told Linux that we would want them to be the governing body of Canton, and they told us that they haven't agreed to talk to any blockchain project. They have Hyperledger that sits under Linux, but the parent organization never agreed. They said everything can go to Hyperledger, but we are not touching these things. And about almost 2 months ago now, they gave us a green light to form a new project under Linux, and we're hoping within the next few weeks to kind of officially kick off the foundation, and Linux will be the governing body for Canton.
Wow. Chris, you eloquently spoke about some of the benefits of global 24/7, 365, but when there's overlapping jurisdictions, how does a regulator get comfortable with that, given what Canton can do?
It's going to take time. It's going to be complicated. Regulators are comfortable with the analog system because there's a lot of redundancy built into it. There's a lot of pauses built into it. Those stop the markets for the night are good for platforms, but they're also good for regulators. Regulators have people that work through the night, figure out what happened during the day.
Not if the bank should go under or not.
Oh, yeah, unfortunately, yeah. And so this is going to be difficult for regulators. And it's going to what happened in the 20th century is certain regulators, the Bank of England, the U.S. regulators, some of the European regulators, some of the Asian regulators like Singapore and Japan have demonstrated leadership that other countries have followed in their regulatory processes. We're going to need those leaders to emerge once again to help the rest of the world through these changes. One of my biggest disappointments is having shown leadership 4 years ago. I think we've lost the lead in helping the rest of the world understand this transformational nature. And I think we need to return to a leadership role in the United States that's been our traditional role of embracing innovation and helping to build the structure. What's interesting about the first wave of the internet of information, the West really not only dominated the principles and the standards, but it also dominated the institutions like the Internet Society and ICANN that really set the tone and made sure that the first wave of the internet was one that was an open architecture, that closed societies and tyrants couldn't control for their own purposes or easily control for their own purposes. And we dominated the values that surrounded it. Now we're going into a new wave of the internet, an internet of value, where we're going to place value ownership, other indices of value on networks. And sadly, the West is relatively muted in setting the standards. The nation that is very loud is China. China is determined to make sure this next wave of the internet is one that is safe for surveillance, safe for censorship, and safe for control. And the West isn't really putting up too much of a fight. It's quite disappointing. The United States is quite absent. I think the EU is doing their part, but we need to change that dynamic. And it may be that it's actually not the Western public sector, but it may be the Western private sector that actually influences the debate in terms of the values. And that's another reason why, I get so excited about Canton, because the values of privacy, the values of both a distributed ledger, but one in which the different individual parties, it's quite democratic, can control their own destiny within the network. Actually kind of not only looks like Swiss democracy, it looks like actually Western democracy in a lot of ways. And I think it's very fitting. So it may be that this time around, the Western public sector is the last to arrive on the scene, and the private sector has got to hold those democratic values until the cavalry rides in, like in an old Western movie, to save the day.
So Yuval, close me out here. There's probably folks in the room who've been interested in this topic for a while, hence them being here. But there's also some folks that have got to go sell it back in their organization, and maybe dealing with some cynicism. Oh, we've heard this tokenization story. Oh, it's all PR, it's all headlines. What do you say to really, if you change jobs tomorrow, you're working in an institution, buy side, sell side, and you have to really get momentum for FY25. We need to go do this. Why?
So I think that the problem that we had as an industry is that the transformation that was sold was too radical. And I think that the way I would pitch it is no different than how you should pitch any business idea. Very clear ROI. There's a lot of capital constraints. Interest rates are not in an environment where money is being printed for free. So I think that rather than going for the radical, like we can talk about what is a long-term vision, but if I had to pitch it within a company that is, not necessarily building infrastructure like ourselves, but actually needs to execute, I would actually think about what is the most limited use case that I can, first of all, show that the technology does what it's supposed to be doing, and it actually have some kind of return on the investment. And the return, again, the net return doesn't have to be positive, but it actually provides some value. So I'll give an example. When we started with Broadridge, the first product that they launched was intra-dealer repo. Not the most exciting product in the world, but actually if you manage your collateral more efficiently, you could get less fees on messages that you send, and you actually can get a better capital treatment. So there is some return to it, but it's just so easy to roll it out. Yeah. So we rolled that product out fairly quick.
But it's real product.
Yeah, it's a real product. The clients started seeing. And then I remember UBS was one of the early ones. They were like, okay, we can see it works. It's great, but we'll only join it if now you do bilateral repo.
Yeah.
And then there was bilateral repo. And then we introduced intraday repo. And now we're introducing sponsored repo. So I think that specifically in this space, people see like some of the public chains that are out there and seeing some people on stages and saying like, this will change financial services. This will do this. This will do this. And then you go to your boss who's like focused on like bottom line or top line, has so many different things coming, and they hear a pitch like that and they're like, get out, yeah. Right? And I actually think the same with regulators, right? Yeah. Sometimes you go with this pitch to a regulator and they're like, okay, everything you know for the last 100 years, forget about it. This is going to be different. And they're like,
heard that one before.
Yeah, I heard that one before. Exactly. So to me, I would say no different than any other business case. You have to, if this technology requires to think about businesses differently, then I don't think you'll be successful.
I always describe that the Goldilocks and Three Bears problem of pitching. I have to find something that's not too big, not too small, but just right to get approved and show value. That's absolutely it. Chris, is there anything I haven't asked you that I wanted to and that you wanted to point out to the audience? And while you're thinking on that, ladies and gentlemen, I will invite you to ask questions. So do think up any questions if you have them in just a moment. But any final thoughts?
I think one of the biggest challenge, I think this innovation is coming. I think the future is very much going to be a kaleidoscope of both highly decentralized systems of value like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and then highly centralized ones, some run by big tech companies in the form of stable coins and others run by governments. I think it's only a matter of time before China exports its ECNY, its digital yuan, to developing countries around the world as a white label product and giving them network value with their Belt and Road initiatives. What so excites me about this is I think it actually is the type of digital network that can be relatively readily adopted in the financial service community, who are going to find themselves increasingly competing with those uncontrollable or highly controlled digital networks. I think the future is going to be one in which we all have to get our head around distributed ledgers and distributed ledger technology. This is going to transform everything we know about finance, everything we know about value. And it's going to be, when you combine that with smart contracts and AI, it's going to take off very, very rapidly. And I think every major financial institution is going to want to be part of one or more networks and is going to look around and say, which ones can we both maintain our own control, but have that connectivity to everybody else.
Innovation wins at the end of the day. Any questions before we close out here? Any show of hands? One at the front here.
Yes, thanks. So the way I see blockchain and decentralization works at the moment is that it tries to take the money out of the traditional banking rails and creates its equivalent for the new internet in a more independent fashion, right? So in a way, is that not competing a bit with the existing financial service players?
I actually think about blockchain technology as slightly different. So when I think about what is capital markets are many different ledgers that when a financial transaction needs to happen, you need to update these ledgers to represent the new state of the world, right? So when you do settlement, you're going to take an asset ledger and you're going to credit debit who are the owners of the asset, and you're going to take the cash ledger and you're going to credit and debit those ledgers. That's a very basic. Imagine now you have a custodian, a broker-dealer. All of these people will have ledgers and they need to update them. The problem is that, historically before computers, we were updating these ledgers by wheeling, carts with certificates, and that's how we credit and debit systems. And then the computers came and we started sending messages to one another. Messages inherently have a reconciliation problem because when I send a message to someone, the only acknowledgement that I get is I received the message. I can't verify that if I send you a message, credit and debit these accounts, that you actually did it until settlement happens and I can see if the money actually went into my account or the assets came into my account. So from my perspective, all that blockchain is doing is giving the ability to reconcile or adjust ledgers atomically in much more efficient manner. So the way I think about innovation, technology, generally speaking, is technology makes connecting A to B as more and more efficient. So if today you need a person to ask a passenger where do they need to go from, and then pick up a radio to ask a car to go and pick that person, technology will replace. So there are intermediaries in financial services that are saying, hey, connecting A to B is really hard. And yes, I think in some cases blockchain will remove it, but there are many financial players that are actually providing risk, they underwriting risk, they're providing actual services that just by connecting A to B becoming more efficient, it doesn't mean that you don't need these services in the middle. A lot of people thought custodians will get out of the world. Custodians is a prehistorical name, right? They don't actually provide custody today. They actually do asset servicing. They do many other functions. So blockchain technology is not going to disintermediate custodians. You still need to underwrite fixed income products. You will still need broker dealers. You'll still need access to markets. You'll still need banks. So I actually don't think that it disintermediates, but it does create opportunities for new entrants to be able to provide these services more efficiently.
One last question, if there's anybody else that has one. Yep.
So Yuval, expanding on that question, do you see a vision whereby both the asset and the cash lake all on Canton, or multi-DLT networks? And if it's the latter, how do you make sure that you have interoperability across multi-DLTs?
Yeah. So, yes, first of all, to the first part, yes, I see cash coming into Canton natively. Hopefully within the next month, you will see potentially a repo transaction being processed against digital cash. So that will be very exciting. But to the question of interoperability, I was actually yesterday on a roundtable with the Fed, and they asked that question. That was literally where they kicked off. And I said, why do you care about interoperability so much? Because to me, interoperability is a business problem, meaning if today someone told us that we will accept Bitcoins as eligible initial margin into a clearinghouse, we will interoperate into Bitcoin. I mean, but currently there are no assets in other networks that our clients are saying, hey, I want to natively interoperate with those things. So first of all, we need to get to a point where there's a business case, because I think that a lot of times regulators and our clients sometimes are saying, can you prove to me that you can interoperate? And we as a commercial business, we need to focus again on spending money and effort on things that will yield returns. So we've done some experiments. We showed that we can interoperate, but we're not putting a good amount of resources. So first of all, there needs to be a business case. And then second of all, there are multiple ways of interoperating. And I think actually that the tokenization platforms are, in my opinion, the best entities to offer interoperability, because it's not a very complicated interoperability. I created an asset on one chain, I can connect to multiple chain, and I can be like a third party offering that interoperability. Circle, for example, when they say interoperability of USDC, that's exactly what they do. They burn USDC on one chain and they mint it on another chain. They don't really do an interoperability. And then there are some messaging solution. The most innovative company in the world, Swift, is offering, a messaging interoperability across blockchain, which we will use. There's Onera. They're offering messaging-based connectivity between chains, which is, in my opinion, a good step to offer connectivity between ledgers. So to me, it's first of all, let's find the business case why to interoperate with something else.
It's a solvable problem, but let's do it when the time is right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for at this particular moment, but you guys will be sticking around for a little bit. People can ask you questions.
I've got to run to a dinner, but
Okay.
I know Yuval will. So
Okay, so Yuval will be here for all of your questions. And please.
No, come on, talk about the podcast this time.
Oh, yeah. We are going to be launching a podcast in the not too distant future with digital.
Simon is going to.
We have a wonderful sponsor in digital asset, and the podcast will be called Tokenized. Those of you that recognize the voice may remember me from Blockchain Insider, which was a very popular sort of institutionally focused digital asset podcast for a number of years. We'll be partnering as well with Visa, and Kai Sheffield over there will be my co-host. And the idea is to have conversations like this, but while you're commuting or whilst you're on a Sunday afternoon, you want something a little bit different and a little bit more fun. So we call the podcast as having a 2-drink minimum. We bring that level of energy, and I hope you've had a 2-drink minimum and really enjoyed your evening. Thank you so much, everybody. You'll be able to check it out on iTunes soon.